Hi everybody, Peter Turner here, the CEO and founder of ConnexionCFO. Today I'm with Susan Steele. I'm going to let Susan introduce herself, but one of the things that was really exciting about having Susan here today is she is an American. She understands the American employment structure, and over the years I've seen a number of businesses have tried to move into the US and have generally all mostly got it wrong. So hopefully Susan can help us in that process today. Hi Susan, if you could just give us a little bit of overview about yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Yes, so I'm an experienced chief people officer and board member. I've helped scale many technology and professional services business. I've been at some big places like Deloitte and WPP and IBM, and I've also been in some smaller PE and VC-backed businesses as well. I think throughout, I've had the experience of both being on the buy side in terms of buying large-scale products, technology, services, and as a consultant in a few roles over the years, I've been on the sell side as well. The beginning of my career was in investment banking, leading sales teams. So I've always been fascinated with sales optimization. And so I bring a bit of that perspective today, as well as extensive experience recruiting in the US and in the
Brilliant.
UK. So pleasure to be here.
Okay, thanks for that. So it'd be great for you just to set the scene for us. How is it different selling in the USA versus selling in the UK?
Yeah. So a couple of key differences. Firstly, there's a different sales culture. In the US, we tend to be a little bit more transactional, very focused on quotas, on meeting targets. And sometimes what that means is we don't take time to build relationships. And I noticed that in the UK, relationship building, the networking, the long-term engagement is more important than it is in a US sales cycle. Also in the US, decision-making tends to be a bit more complex and involves more stakeholders. In the UK, we've got sort of maybe more classical hierarchies in terms of buying. In the US, it's complicated. And in fact, a McKinsey study showed that on average in the US, there's about 7 key stakeholders involved in any one purchase. And that number is much lower in the UK. And then lastly, in the US, we tend to be more data-driven. So what this means is that we tend to rely on technology in terms of honing in on the sales funnel. And in the UK, it's much more focused on personal engagement, networking, and so on. So a couple of key differences in terms of selling.
Okay. And what pointers do you have for UK businesses that are looking to move or to recruit salespeople in the US?
Yeah, I have quite a few. So we'll buckle up our seatbelts and now think about moving to set up a sales team in the US. Firstly, in recruiting in the US, we move fast. And that's for several reasons. But it's not unusual for somebody to see a job posted or get a call from a recruiter, express interest, quickly look to set up interviews, complete all the interviews, get an offer, accept the offer, resign, and start the next week. So in my experience, most UK companies are not used to working as quickly. In the US, only about 10% of employees have notice periods. So what that means is 90% of people do not have notice periods, which means chances are the person you're going to be recruiting could be with you as quickly as next week. If you're not ready for that sort of speed, don't start to recruit. Don't start recruiting until you've got everything lined up and are ready to go. The next thing is make sure that your compensation and your overall offer are truly competitive. Depending on where you recruit, cost of living differences are massive. New York, for example, is about 130% higher cost of living than on average in the rest of the US. So if you're recruiting there, you're going to have to pay more. Also, salaries in the US are just higher. So the average salary for a salesperson in the US, including their commissions, is about $120,000 a year. That's much higher than the average sales role in the UK. Compensation usually always has some performance incentives like commission, bonus, even equity. And then benefits are pretty standardized. You must offer private medical, sometimes dental, pension contributions, and so on. A few other things to bear in mind is make sure your employer brand really resonates with American candidates. Don't think that just having a UK career site is going to appeal to somebody in the US. It won't. So take the time to just revise your collateral, your career site, and so on, to make sure that it really is attracting US candidates as well. And then I think last but not least, but very important, is make sure all of your contracts and offer letters comply with not only US federal law, but US state law as well. We have 50 states, and I would almost say that each state has its own set of employment regulations. So it's very complicated depending on where you're based and where your employees are based, to make sure you're complying with state law as well as federal law, and your contracts comply with that as well. So a bit of that. And then I'd say lastly, Peter, the US is a big place and we have many different regions. So make sure you're hiring the right salesperson for the right market. I wouldn't recruit somebody to sell into Silicon Valley who's only ever worked on the East Coast and maybe in the Southeast of the US. Make sure you're aligning not only sector expertise, but local market expertise as well. I think if you do all of that, you'll at least have a good chance of recruiting the right sales talent that you need.
Yeah, so over the years, I've seen a number of businesses who have brought on board a salesperson and they've paid them a base of 200 or 250,000, which is well above your 120. And I know that's just a medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those people generally haven't lasted that long. And I guess that's an expectation probably that I'm going to ask you the question actually. What is that an expectation of? Is it an expectation of the business in the UK having higher expectations of somebody's ability to bring in business, or is it there's a cultural misalignment from the salesperson in America? I'm not getting enough training, not getting enough resources.
Mm-hmm. I think you raise a good point there, which is make sure you're clear on your objectives from the very beginning. And increasingly, businesses are setting short-term and longer-term objectives for their sales teams. Obviously, setting a quota is one thing, but you need to look at the bigger picture as well, and look at what I call lead indicators for success as well. So is the salesperson, building the pipeline? Are they making the requisite number of calls and meetings? Are they getting proposals out on time? All these things will give you as a leader an indication of whether the people you've just recruited are performing well. And if not, gives you a chance to help step in and figure out what's wrong. Is it that they don't have objectives? Is it that they know what they need to do? They don't know how to do it. It could be a skill gap. Or is there something in your processes that maybe is getting in the way that's inhibiting them in terms of selling in the US, where maybe the rest of your team is selling in the UK? Your processes haven't been adapted for the US market. So there can be a number of things that may contribute to that mismatch in terms of expectation and results.
Okay, and so I've decided I'm going to move my business to the US. I'm off to let's say Chicago, and what should I be thinking in terms of the training that I should be putting in place, and any additional resources, and how should I communicate with that person on a regular basis? Just make sure that they feel as they're part of the team.
So I think firstly about the training. I'd say a couple of things. To me, training starts day one, or even prior to that, when your new hire arrives. So you've just hired the sales team in Chicago. The onboarding piece is super critical. And frankly, a lot of organizations sort of skim over that and think, well, they're excited to join. We're excited to have them, so it'll be great. Actually, statistics show that people who leave their employer in the first year of employment, those seeds of doubt are planted in the first 30 days of employment. So get those first 30 days right.
Yep.
Even if you don't have as much focus on the next 30 days, make sure those first 30 days are a fantastic onboarding, welcoming experience, including training for the new hire. And then you at least have probability on your side. In terms of training more generally, these days, training is not going off for 2 weeks to a resort somewhere and watching PowerPoints. It's very much integrated into the flow of work. So one of the things that is done now pretty routinely in sales roles is building in little digital learning modules into your CRM. So for example, in Salesforce, you won't be able to advance an opportunity to the next stage until you've completed a bit of digital learning that's really designed to help you be more successful in closing business to that next stage and so on. So the learning is built into how we work. It's no longer something that happens away from work. So I think that the training is important, and we know that every employee in sales or any other part of the organization considers their own career development and skill development to be a really critical part of the employment contract. If I'm not being developed, I'm going to leave. And it's as simple as that. So you not only have to have these things in place, but be able to discuss them both before hiring and then once people are on board with you. And then you mentioned another piece of it, Peter, which is the check-in and the communication. Again, the tendency, especially if you have teams in another country, maybe, well, I'll see them when I see them, or they'll let me know if they need help. I would suggest that actually having a regular standing check-in meeting once a week, quick touch base, doesn't have to be a long meeting, but just to check in, see how they're progressing on their goals, see what help they need, if any. And see where you can add value to help ensure they're successful. That goes a long way, especially when you're not likely to run into them in the office because they're in another country.
Yeah. I mean, as you're speaking, there's so many other questions that I'd really like to ask. But the one question I have is, I want to move to Chicago. I want to start up a ConnexionCFO there. I don't have any contacts or connections, so I'm going to go out and recruit this salesperson to help me get established in Chicago. Am I going to find somebody who's got a big black book of people, and is that realistic? Or am I going to find somebody who's got partnerships, and is that realistic? So, how am I going to build a pipeline for this person, or am I expecting them to build the pipeline?
Yeah. So, are you going to buy somebody with a book, or recruit somebody with a book of business? I'd say the days of having the little black book are sort of gone, but the black book these days is data, right? It's data in your CRM, it's data in your sales automation pipeline to help ensure that you're really focusing your sales efforts in the places where it's going to be most beneficial. And what I would say is that not only do you need that as the company who's setting up in Chicago, I think you'll find it hard to recruit talent unless you can show them that you've got the tech stack in place to make them successful. That helps reduce likelihood of not landing your sales message in the right place, helps ensure the sales team is successful, makes life easier for everybody, and more than covers the cost of the tech. So there's a lot, and we'll have a chance to talk about some of the tech, but that is increasingly important. So yeah, I would say hire somebody who's got experience working with these tools rather than an old-fashioned salesperson who just comes in with a Rolodex, if that still exists.
Sorry, I'm developing a cough. So what could you give me an example of what that tech stack could look like?
Yeah, sure. So what I would say is that if you could imagine every step of the sales process and even the pre-sales process, there's now tech to help make that more efficient and effective. So let's take, for example, getting ready to cold call a client or go into a first-time meeting. It is probably nothing more daunting than that, no matter how experienced you are. And the great news is that AI can now help with that. So, for example, I plug in my prospective client's LinkedIn profile into an AI tool, and it will not only look at that profile, but look at a lot of unstructured data around that to tell me as much insight as possible about that person, and then use that to help coach me and guide me on how to approach that client, what I should say, how I should say it, my tone, my content, and will continue to score me and give me feedback until, in the eye of the AI tool, I've gotten it to be really a very compelling pitch, in which case it'll give me the sort of good to go signal, and then I know I'm ready to have the call. So it allows us to do the prep and the role playing and the practice with constant feedback in a way that no sales manager could ever provide. And then sort of looking through the sales process, putting together compelling bids, proposals, RFP responses. AI is right at your side to help ensure that happens. And then to the extent that the team learns from that, maybe doesn't win, gets feedback, has to improve, close skill gaps, AI is there to help with that as well. So I think pretty much throughout the sales cycle, there's going to be tech that will help improve efficiency and effectiveness in the sales team.
Yeah, I once used a tool, I'm pretty sure it was called Crystal, where you typed in the name of Susan Steele and it would come up and it would look at all the comments and all the posts that you've written. And as a result of that, it could tell me about your personality style. Were you a big thinker, or were you more of a knower, or are you a feeler, etc., and all those types of personality traits. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, there's so many tools out there. I think the challenge sometimes with those is if you're not doing any posts, there's no social scrapings to scrape. So you need something that maybe looks a bit beyond that. But so, everybody's using those tools now. So you want to make sure you're offering them to your sales team and they're encouraged to use them.
And how does AI impact that then when it's automating posts and writing posts for people?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's never been easier to post. So really, I guess for some folks, if they're still not posting, despite all the AI capabilities that are at their disposal, then maybe they truly want to be behind a firewall, as it were. I don't know. But yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. And how do you see the US sales environment changing, and how do you feel UK businesses should maybe adjust or adapt to that changing sales environment?
Well, I think there's a few things. So firstly, what we're seeing in the US is a focus on what I call outcome-based compensation. So it used to be that salespeople were just rewarded on the inputs, which would be, I've done this sale, and now I'm going to get commission or some sort of bonus because I've sold this contract. Increasingly, what organizations are doing is saying, actually, the value of that contract is much more in terms of retention of a client, upselling, cross-selling, client satisfaction, NPS scores. So instead of just giving somebody financial compensation for the sale, the scorecard is more complex and therefore would be looked at over a period of time rather than just paid out upfront. Clearly, the contract value is a factor, as is the margin. But I'd say in the US especially, we're seeing much more what I call outcome-based compensation in place than we've seen in the past, and certainly compared to other markets in the UK and Europe. The other thing we're seeing, and again, I think this is maybe a little bit more universal, but certainly in the US, which is a big country, is that with remote working and hybrid working, being able to do what I call remote selling has become a core competency. if you can't establish rapport online, if you can't advance opportunities without ever being face-to-face or in person with a client, close deals that way, and so on, you're probably not somebody that Peter would want to have on a sales team in Chicago, for example. So make sure that your sales team can do that remote selling. And then I think the other thing that we're seeing is that there continues to be greater and greater demand for consultative and value-based selling as well. So don't just flog products at me, but help me understand the value, be my trusted advisor, help me understand the ROI of this, and help educate me. And increasingly now with a lot of tech solutions, you really do have to educate the client so that they're in a better position to understand how your solution can help them. But those are some of the trends that we're seeing, especially in the US.
Yeah, I think that also applies to consultancy or professional services firms as well. If you take something like myself, the market tends to rely on placing people on almost like a day rate or a body shopping type approach. But actually, I think that the more important thing is, what is the outcome that you're looking to get from this engagement? And actually, maybe you could break an engagement with, e.g., a fractional CFO or an interim CFO into projects, so that you're always getting something back as a result. You can define the value element rather than just selling a product. I definitely think that's more advantageous for clients.
And it's a great way to show the value as well, and possibly price according to value as well.
Yeah, 100%. And so, and what are the typical errors that British firms generally make going into the US?
I think some of the things that they somehow miss is underestimating how competitive the US market is. Everybody wants to sell in the US. And so, you're not alone. Your competitors are there. They've possibly been there much longer than you've been there. And I think the biggest mistake that organizations make is just not preparing their value prop, their market positioning for the US market to really show how they bring competitive advantage over others. And research sort of bears this out. I mean, Harvard Business Review found that 70% of foreign businesses who went into the US grossly underestimated the complexity of the US market and had to completely retrench and revamp once they were there, because they suddenly realized it was a more complex market than they had anticipated. I think another piece is just recognizing that what works here in the UK may not work in the US. You've got to adapt and adjust. You can't just parachute in and do the same thing. That means your collateral, your proposals, your websites all have to be tuned to the US buyers rather than possibly what you're used to in the UK. And then I think, many businesses feel, okay, well, we've got a couple of salespeople in Chicago, we're good to go. Well, actually, no, you maybe actually need a sales leader, sales manager who's there on the ground as well. And if not actually on the ground with the sales team, at least somebody who's already had that experience leading sales teams in the US to be able to guide and get best results from them. So I think those are some of the classic errors that we see with UK businesses sort of dashing to get into the US market and then not really taking the time to understand the market and resource accordingly.
And there's 52 states in America. Which one do I choose?
52. Okay. You just added 2.
50 states in America. Which one do I choose?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do your homework. Look to see where the sector you're focused in is, has the most opportunity. Look at cost of doing business as well. I mean, everything from taxes, employer taxes, income tax vary by state, and your cost of your resources vary significantly state to state. So it may be that you don't need to be in New York. You could operate very comfortably out of Pennsylvania, where the costs are going to be a lot lower, but you're still quite close and within easy commuting distance of New York. So I think that's a complex blend. I don't know the algorithm for quite figuring that out, but there's a lot of location consultancies who'd love to answer that question for you. But I would say go carefully.
Okay. I quite like the idea of the location consultancies.
Mm-hmm.
If you have anybody who you can introduce to me to, that would be fantastic.
Okay, yeah, there's a few out there.
And so, Susan, how can you help people looking to move into the US?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my advice would be that there's a few things that businesses could do to get ready. So I think firstly, do some homework, as I said. Start, if you're not already, start subscribing to some of the really fantastic research that's out there coming out of the consulting firms, take your pick, but are doing in-depth research on the various sectors in the US market. So you maybe understand manufacturing in Europe, but you may be less familiar with manufacturing in the US. So just make sure you're getting up to speed on your sector, your industry sector. And also if, like your business, Peter, is working with functional roles, make sure you're familiar with, the CFO role in the US and trends there. The good news is that if you don't have time to read all that research that may be hitting your inbox, these days with AI, you can just convert that into a simple, easy to listen to podcast. Listen to that when you're off cycling or doing your run in the morning. So it's easy to consume that information. And while you're at it, there's a few podcasts you should probably start listening to as well. Tons of US podcasts. I have a couple favorites, which I could share. But there's lots to listen to there. I'm very interested in innovation and what's happening in the startup world globally, but especially in the US. So I listen to This Week in Startups by a VC investor called Jason Calacanis. Great stuff. It comes out at least once a week, sometimes more. And then old-fashioned books. There's a great book called Working with Americans. It's now in its second edition, written by Allison Stewart Allen and Lainey Denslow. Very useful in terms of businesses going to the US for the first time. I would definitely suggest reading that. And then last but not least, I'd suggest really getting up to speed on using AI to help enhance your sales function and your sales people. Because even though it may not be business as usual here, I can assure you in the US, sales teams you'll be recruiting will already be used to using a lot of these tools. So make sure you have an understanding of them and you put them on your roadmap for when you'll be introducing them into your business. You'll stand a much greater chance of being successful in the market and also being successful at recruiting the sort of talent that you need.
Susan, and just in terms of a final summary, final comment for everybody.
A final comment. Listen, it's not for the faint of heart, for sure, jumping into the US market, but it's very doable. Do your research, do your homework, bring on great talent, retain them, help them grow, and you're sure to succeed. I think it's pretty straightforward, but does require a bit of focus. So thanks, Peter, for the chance to share some thoughts with everybody today.
It's been great. Of the businesses I've seen over the years that have gone to America, my overview summaries would be it's always more expensive than what you think, always takes a little bit longer, always requires more resources. But actually, if you do the planning and preparation, it's a lot less expensive than getting it wrong.
Indeed. Indeed. And
Susan,
in a litigious place like the US, you do not want to get it wrong.
exactly. Susan, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. If anybody wants to, you can reach out to Susan direct or reach out to myself and I'll introduce you to Susan.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Righto.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.